in the last Sunday of Epiphany, and Epiphany is the greatest epiphany, is maybe, I don't know if it's the greatest epiphany. I mean, you could argue about that. I think Christmas is a great epiphany of a baby in a manger. Is what's called the Transfiguration of Jesus. It is always, this is Transfiguration Sunday. It is always the Sunday leading us to Ash Wednesday, into Lent. And it's a beautiful thing because we're going to be on a mountain, and we're going to talk about being on the mountain. But immediately after the Transfiguration is over, the passages and all the Gospels deal with the Transfiguration. They take you right back down into the valley. And in Matthew, there's immediately a guy crying out for his daughter. And so this Transfiguration prepares us, actually kind of stands guard over Lent and as we engage the coming weeks ahead. Hopefully this is a great intro into that. So the Transfiguration story, I'm just going to read it here. Sometimes, we all want an encounter with God. An encounter with God happens here, and I think the surprise is where the encounter with God actually comes. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. But the end of this, and the end reality of the Transfiguration, is that we're never without grace. We're never without the grace, the radiant, unstoppable, never-ending love and grace of Christ. I think we miss this, and sometimes we don't know what to do with the Transfiguration. It seems like an event that the disciples were part of, seemed really cool, but doesn't have any real application for us. So here we go. I'm going to read right through it, and then I'm going to go back to, and then just talk about it. 6 days later, Jesus took Peter and two brothers, James and John, and led them up to a high mountain to be alone. As the disciples watched, Peter, James, and John watched, Jesus' appearance was transformed so that his face shone like the sun, and his clothes became as white as light. Suddenly, Moses and Elijah appeared and began talking with Jesus. And Peter said to Jesus, "Lord, it is good that we are here. If you want, I'll make 3 shelters as memorials, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." But even as he spoke, a bright cloud overshadowed them, and a voice from the cloud came from the cloud and said, "This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him." The disciples were terrified and fell face down to the ground. But Jesus came and touched them, saying, "Rise and do not be afraid." And when they lifted up their eyes, they saw no one but Jesus only. So go back to that. So here we are with this event. There's so much going on in this event. And some of it's really, really meaningful. In fact, if you were ever really engaging this event, it's really powerful because Moses and Elijah are there. But it also ties into an Old Testament occurrence when Moses went up a mountain, actually got the law of God, and he came down and his face was shining. That's in the book of Exodus. His face was shining. Jesus' face is shining. There's a lot going on here. I may touch upon the ultimate reality of that, but that's really, really powerful if you actually took the tale of the 2 mountains, and you would see something that Christ brought that Moses could never bring. But we're going to see what Christ brought, but not in that particular way. So there's so much going on here. We may wonder what and how we would experience this text and how we would feel this text, but it's always the truth that Peter is a gift to us, man. Because Peter is us in this moment. And so Peter's going to help us experience it, because I think we somewhat experience it the same way that Peter does here. So James, John, and Peter are going up a mountain. Even that is interesting, and I won't get into why those 3, but they're on this mountain, and they see something happen to Jesus. And Jesus transfigured. The word transform there is, it's literally kind of like a metamorphosis, that something happened, and there's a lot of Jesus is God here and all that. I'm not going there today. But anyway, something happened to Jesus. that was pretty incredible. I mean, they went up the mountain to be alone, and Jesus' face is radiant and shining. A metamorphosis, as it were, has happened to Jesus, and his face shone like the sun. That's a pretty powerful experience. And that's a pretty incredible reality that Peter, James, and John are watching. And his face shone like the sun, and his clothes, something happened to his clothes. They became white as light. I mean, you would think that if that were us, and maybe, well, I'm going to show how we're kind of like Peter, that was us. That's a pretty incredible experience to see what is happening. So that's going on. So Jesus' face is shining and is bright. His clothes are radiant and they're white. But we hear nothing from the disciples at all. We don't hear anything from Peter. And when they choose to talk, Peter does not choose to talk till Moses and Elijah show up. And then every bone in his body goes crazy. And when he chooses to talk, he says nothing about Jesus. He says nothing about this incredible experience of Jesus' radiating light and his radiating face and his transforming clothes. He sees Moses and Elijah. He sees the Old Testament, and he can't contain himself. Peter is so us. That was the issue in that day as well. Jesus will have to say to the religious leaders, you search the scriptures to find me, and I'm standing right in front of you. Because the tendency of religious people especially is to open up the scriptures and only see Moses and Elijah. It could be our tendency too. Be the tendency of many to say, yeah, Jesus is beautiful, and move right on to things that matter, like Moses and Elijah. That's where the meat is. Going back to last week's sermon. If this were written in our day and age, I think Matthew, if he were alive today, could you imagine Peter having Facebook and Instagram? Yeah, we have. Yeah, I don't know that any of the great giants of the faith would last in the religious world on Twitter, that's for sure. Yep, they'd be canceled. Imagine. And this is what we end up doing with this event. It's how Peter starts. So why Peter is us. Jesus is there. His face is changed. Moses and Elijah is there, and Peter is prepared for every moment that he is ever in to capture it, because he's got his selfie stick, and he's going to pull out that selfie stick. He's going to put up his phone, and he's going to tell Moses and Elijah, come here, closer. Jesus probably be half cut off at the other thing. Really cool. Moses and Elijah, got to get this. Got my selfie stick up here. I'm going to take a picture. He posts it on Facebook. He posts it on Instagram. Hashtag blessed. Hashtag it's good that we're here. Hashtag mountaintop experience. Hashtag you name it. And he'd get likes, and it'd be really cool, and it'd be really all of those things. And I mean, he'd be sharing that, and he would be, oh, Peter, that's the greatest thing in the world. And I probably would go viral. Because Peter is so us. We all long for an encounter with God. We do long for an encounter with God because we're made in His image. And to be made in His image means that whether you're churched or unchurched, whether you're, spiritual, atheist, or whatever, whether you agree with it or not, you're longing for an encounter. An encounter with something other than yourself if you don't believe in God. But you're longing for God, but you may think it's for something other than Him. You're longing for an encounter with Jesus. We were made in His image. We were made to experience and feel that and all of that reality. And that's all Peter is doing. Peter is us. And we're longing for that. But inevitably what happens within certainly religious settings. We're longing for that social media post that will say, #blessed. Over some experience, all of my life. And it doesn't even stop even now, even in my particular calling. People come up to me. Has Jesus ever spoken to you? Have you ever had a vision? Have you ever spoken in tongues? Have you ever had any experience in this hierarchy of holiness? Have you ever felt really moved in the Spirit, like in a Sunday morning worship? And what I want to do is sometimes I stare blankly to most of those questions, and I say, nope, I haven't. Where does that leave me? It's left me most of my life, spending most of my life like I'm a spiritual failure. #blessed. No, I haven't. We all yearn for some kind of affective experience that validates our faith, and usually what we're longing for is something that we can see so we can walk by sight when we've been commanded to walk by faith, and the Transfiguration is all about walking by faith and not sight. And the reason Peter has his selfie stick out is because he's consumed with walking by sight. He did not, a few weeks later, put on Instagram #denier, did he? And whatever this mountaintop experience was, it didn't keep him from denying Christ, did it? It did not. We long for our faith to be validated. And Jesus is going to validate it here. But He's going to do it in a way, in an encounter, that sometimes I think the church refuses to see. I think actually the reality of the Transfiguration is that my screen went completely white. It's Transfiguration Sunday, and now dark. There's the story of the Transfiguration, right on my point of my sermon, that Jesus is going to cultivate our encounter in the dark. By faith. I don't go by faith. I got my phone. And I had it up because my battery was going low. So there you go. I walk by sight. I think Jesus' goal, and honestly, if you've come to Nature Coast for any length of time, is that our cultivation of how God moves, He lives and moves in our very being, that how God moves and is moving in my life and in your life actually comes in the dark and murky places. And that's exactly what happens in the Transfiguration. God has a different kind of encounter for #Peter. The hashtag stuff kind of came to me yesterday. I would actually entitle this sermon #Peter. Because look at this. So Peter's in this moment. You can go to the next slide. There's his hashtag. Lord, it is good for us to be here. Shelters, beautiful thing. Tabernacles, not going to that. Go to the next slide. So in the middle of hashtag Peter being blessed, hashtag Peter in the middle of it's good for us to be here, in the middle of his every waking, certainly Jewish bone in his body going crazy, in the moment where he says, let's make this mountaintop experience permanent. Let's build shelters. I don't ever want to leave this mountaintop experience. I want Moses here forever. I want Elijah here forever. And yeah, maybe Jesus to be here forever too. In the middle of his hashtag mountaintop experience, he is so not God that what happens to Peter? Mark actually says he's blabbering. He's so excited. What happens to Peter? In the middle of his sentence, God says, shut up. Shut up, Peter. Shut up. Because even as Peter spoke, a dark cloud came upon him. Shut up, Peter. And overshadowed them like a piercing shadow. And there in the midst of the darkness is where the encounter with God is going to happen. They heard a voice, "This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him." The disciples were terrified and fell face down to the ground. And they were terrified. He went from hashtag Peter to a place of complete terror. How did that happen? Because in Scripture, when you encounter God, the holy God, the other God, you're always typically face down. Why is that? Well, part of the reality is that for Peter, when you face God and you actually hear what he said, well, this is my beloved Son, I'm well pleased, listen to him. Well, just a few verses later, Peter had rebuked Jesus and told him, you know what? This suffering idea, this idea of suffering, that's not for you, Jesus. That's not Messiah stuff. That's not Messiah stuff. So Peter has to be thinking within moments that I've been told to listen to him by God himself, and I just tried to thwart him 10 verses earlier. And it isn't just that for Peter, James, and John. Their whole lives probably flashed before them, and all the ways they hadn't listened to him, all the ways that betrayed him, all the ways ultimately that they will also betray them that they don't even know about yet. But they speaks for us. You know, our lives are governed by fear. They are. You may say, no, yes, they are. It is so ingrained in who we are. It's ingrained in our society. It's ingrained in, I can't even get up here and speak. And there's nothing wrong with it. It's just a reality. It's a reality of fallenness. It's the reality, I believe, of why we've been given the transfiguration. I can't even get up here and speak. And for the most part, for those of you who come every week, you may have heard me speak before. And you may, for some reason, have chosen that this is where you want to be. But we live in this world where we're always judged by performance. It just is. I mean, you can't get around it. Whether it's your job or whatever, we're all judged by how we perform. And so every week, even here, I mean, we even for our musicians who are up here, you know, how am I doing? Am I going to be like judged by my performance because there's people sitting there maybe evaluating me? For me, it's the sermon. There's visitors here. They've actually come, and there's nothing actually wrong with this, so don't hear me. They've actually come to see what I share, to maybe try to evaluate whether it's biblical or not. It's part and parcel of the process. And so every time I get up and speak, I'm aware of that. You know, and I'm aware of that. And so sometimes my first service, well, a lot of times my first service and second service really look nothing like each other other than the text. But, you know, you have that first service. If something gets a bad reaction, maybe I won't say that. Maybe I met someone come in. I know they're wired a certain way, and I won't say that certain word this time. I mean, because they're here, and I want them to come back or whatever. I mean, you go on and on and on. It just consumes our lives. It's just a fact. It's not necessarily a good thing or a bad thing. It's just a reality. Our lives are governed by fear. I don't even think we know where it's come from. We fear failure. We fear loss. It's the way that life works. I don't want to get a call in the middle of the night from one of my children. That's fearful for me. I don't we all live against a performance and a standard. We all want likes on our social media posts. We want to be liked by those closest to us. My story is I want to be liked for who I am. Most of us, we turn love into a commodity. Even in our most intimate and personal relationships, we still feel like, will I be loved for who I am, or will I loved? That's the environment and the reality of to grow up, to perform and to work. And then I got really good at it. I knew how to be the teacher's pet in school. I knew how to win the Timothy Award at my Christian school, which was the award for the best kid. Okay, I got that a lot. I knew how to do it. And yet I grew up and I always wondered, am I liked for what I am doing? And then I'd see kids who wouldn't win the Timothy Award, and you know what? They just weren't liked as well. Everyone wanted a kid in school like me. But was I liked for who I actually was? Or was I liked because I knew how to perform and become everybody's golden boy? It's just ingrained to us. We do it with our kids, good grades, bad grades, lose weight, don't lose weight. I got my hair cut. Do you like it? Do you not? We wonder. We live in that world. We can't escape it. Our politics. I can't wait till the next political season. Do you know what? I don't care which party you're for. Every ad you will see will be basically trying to get you to fear something. It is so ingrained in our society. I don't care which side of the aisle you're on. It's all related to fear. We live in constant fear. It's why we buy guns. It's why we check our bank balance. It's why we measure ourselves against our neighbors and compare ourselves to each other. We fear being found out. We fear being exposed. We fear we can't even make a decision where to send our kids to school. It's all based upon fear and what's best. We can't choose the church because it's based upon doing it wrong or right. It is so ingrained in us. And I could go on. And yet it was in this moment of fear where the disciples were terrified and they fell face down to the ground. And now they were ready for God to encounter them. They were ready for an encounter with God. They were ready to have him move in their very being. And that's the next slide. Here's the encounter with God. But Jesus came and touched them while they were terrified and while they were afraid, and said, "Rise and do not be afraid." What were the first words out of Jesus' mouth when the Father said just seconds ago, "This is my beloved Son in whom I'm well pleased. Listen to him"? What were the words, the very first words out of Jesus' mouth? Rise up and do not be afraid. Guess what the first words of the resurrected Christ were his disciples in that upper room? Peace to you, do not be afraid. What should be the words of every uttered sermon? Do not be afraid, church, but rise up. I don't know in your story, but this is the encounter God speaks. It says he touches them. If this were be a church today, I don't know. We think Jesus shows up. After, like earlier in the chapter, where Peter hasn't listened to Jesus very well. Jesus touches them, tells them to get up, and then tells them every way in the past that they actually haven't listened to him. Is that what he did? Nope. No scolding. No judgment. Complete mercy and complete grace. You stand up and you rise. And Moses and Elijah were gone. And if you want a theological treatise to this passage, you just go to the Apostle Paul. Because when Moses and Elijah are gone, Paul is saying that when Jesus Christ came, that Christ is the end of the law. It's done. It cannot accuse you in your fear. We are afraid, and in that fear comes accusation. The accusation, if I don't send my kids the right choice, I'm a bad parent. The accusation that if I don't discipline my kid in the right way, then I'm a bad parent. The accusation of the law is always hitting our fear. And it's always there. And Christ in the transfiguration is touching you and me this morning in our uncertainty, in our doubt, in the places of sheer terror about what we are doing, in our places of failure, in our places of loss, and saying that law that says you are not enough, that law that sits there and accuses you and condemns you, when you raise your eyes up from this moment, it's not there anymore to accuse you. It's not there to condemn you, even if you are guilty, because I am the end of the law. And I have come to touch you in mercy and grace. And that is the encounter that I want with my people. That is the only way my people will move forward. It's the only way my people. Paul will say this, and I don't know where we get. Jesus says in this world, you will have tribulation and suffering. Jesus says in this world, you will be persecuted. Paul is saying that the sufferings of this world cannot compare to the glory that comes. But this life and our encounter with God is one of suffering, and God will not move in any other way. He only moves in your dark places. He only moves. Paul will actually say that we now see through a glass darkly, but there will be a day we're face to face, but that day isn't now, and it's misty, and it's raining, and the clouds are coming, and I don't know what's happening. I'm experiencing failure, and I'm experiencing loss. That's the place that God moves. And that's my longing. This stands guard over Nature Coast. It stands guard over Lent, because if Nature Coast can never be a place where we lose our tears. Because the minute we lose our tears, we've lost Jesus. And we've embraced some kind of power thing that he's irrelevant to. When they are alone, they don't see God the Father. They don't see the Holy Spirit. They only see Jesus. Jesus came, and he meets us in our fears. There's a podcast called Radio Lab. It's interesting. They had one that was entitled The Right to Be Forgotten. Here's the problem in the internet age. What was happening, and they actually found out that the Cleveland Plain Dealer, which is the major newspaper in the city of Cleveland, they now have an editorial board, because what they were finding, they started getting letters to the paper. And these were letters from people who had actually committed crimes and somehow through the system got their record cleaned up, the charges expunged, set free by the courts. When you only had a printed paper, if you ever wanted to know that, well, you could go to the library, go through tons and tons of microfiche. Maybe you'd find it, maybe you wouldn't. But here's the problem. The courts have set them free, but the Internet Archives haven't. They go to get a job. All you need is a Google, and there it is. There it is. So these people are writing the Cleveland Plain Dealer and saying, can you just please remove my name? Can you remove my name? And here's what happened. Here's what the court said. I'm expunged. I'm whatever. So they actually had to create this whole editorial board. This is part of the podcast. They had to create this whole editorial board, and they let us, the podcast lets you in on some of the discussions, and they sit and debate amongst human beings whether you're worthy of getting your name expunged or cleared. And there was this lawyer, I think he actually lied under oath to a judge. And I mean, it's interesting to hear the comments because, well, I'd want to know that if that was my lawyer. And someone said that, like, I wouldn't want to hire a lawyer like that. And then someone shot back at them, well, yes, you would if you were trying to get off and he was going to lie to the judge and get away with it. You'd be a great lawyer to have. It was interesting, some of the things that were said, because part of the criteria is they argued back and forth, what would it be like if your worst moments were cemented online? Some people's ours, mine aren't. We all have them. But imagine your words and your worst moment cemented online forever. One of the criteria as they were doing it is forgiveness can't be part of the equation. Just a set of facts that people were doing it. And finally, they talked to this professor of internet governance. Here's what he said. We don't know how to willingly disregard memories of our past, and we don't know how to forgive when we remember. And so as we become a remembering society because of internet archiving, we've actually, and this is 100% true, just go to social media, we become an unforgiving society. It seems that left to our own devices, with judgment as our only option, that the only way to be forgiven is to be forgotten. That the only way to be forgiven is to be forgotten. And you know what? We can laugh and we can make fun of the Cleveland plain dealer, but one of the worst places of judgment is the Church of Jesus Christ. We have memories that we'll not forget, and we will make people pay. And even if they try to go somewhere else, we'll send the internet archives somewhere else. Reminded me of Macbeth. The guilt of the blood on the body, rubbing and running, out you damn spots, out you damn spots. And you can't be washed clean. Those are the fears in which we live. But here's the truth of the transfiguration is that grace, that God looks at the scars that you and I have, and he doesn't destroy the memory of them out of our lives, and he still forgives us and loves us. And even in his memory, he can remember them no more. When his radiant light shines upon those areas of our life, our worst moments that we can't undo, that we can't reject, that we can't take back, when his radiant light shines and finds a trembling soul, he touches that trembling soul and says, rise up, church, and do not be afraid. Whatever that worst moment is for you. It may be archived on the internet. It may be not. But he takes your trembling, fearful soul and he touches you. And he says, rise up and do not be afraid. Rise up. Because I'm encountering you in your darkness. I'm encountering in you. So rise up and you can move because I am in your very being as the resurrected Christ. Jesus is saying to you and I, you will not be forgotten, but you will be forgiven. Nature Coast Church, there is no place in your life that's too frightening for his grace to exist. None. There is no place in your life that is too frightening for God, for his grace to exist. Because where you might expect condemnation, he's bringing mercy. The transfiguration. Christ does not blast sinners on the mountain. He says, get up and don't be afraid. You may feel judged or be judged, but I've already been judged for you on the cross. You may be afraid, but I am with you, and wherever I go, surely my goodness and mercy will follow you. Nature Coast Church, we are living as we approach Lent under the shadow of the cross, which means that you and I are never alone, and we are never, ever, ever without grace. That's the story of the Transfiguration. That the encounter with God did not happen with Peter's selfie stick. It encountered when they were terrified and God showed up. And he's here to touch your shoulder this morning, to hold your hand, internet archives and all, and say, my dear, dear child, rise up and do not be afraid. And when they lifted up their eyes, they saw no one but Jesus only. Can I just take a moment here to pat myself on the back? They looked up and saw Jesus plus nothing equals everything, every single time in every portion of Scripture. You can't run from it. I didn't write that. They didn't see Moses and Elijah. They're gone. They saw Jesus, and Jesus only. This morning, they had their first 10 a.m. prayer meeting, and as we were being prayed for, my wife was praying, and it made me think, one of the enterprises where I fear is this enterprise every week of getting up and standing and delivering a message to you, and all of those inner fears that come on, whether it's going to be good enough or it's not going to be good enough. But I forget what she said, but the way it prayed, it's almost like I was being told, Brad, in the midst of that trembling, in the midst of the terror, I'm going to touch your hand and I'm going to touch your shoulder right now. And I want you, Brad, to lift up your eyes and see not any people standing here, but to see Jesus only. Then I'm free. I'm completely free. And now I'm free to move and to love my neighbor. Rise up, Nature Coast, and do not be afraid. We're going to tell you the offer, or to do the Lord's table. We can't even do this. So if you're helping serve the Lord's table, please come up and do this. We can't even do the Lord's table without making people afraid, right? That was our part and parcel to the reality of the Lord's table in the world. I was to make people afraid. We can't help ourselves. We can't help ourselves. So as you come, who is the table for? It's for the people who are terrorized on the ground, hearing the condemnation of everything you've ever done wrong and not being enough. I encourage you to come this morning and let him, through the table, say these words to you as you eat and drink. Rise up, my dear child, and do not be afraid. Because I am God, and I have thundered from heaven that you are my beloved sons and daughters, and I am well pleased with you. That is the only sermon you need to ever hear, and it is the only way you will ever live and move in your walk in the Christian life, is to be set free by that one sentence sermon that has come to our ears from the God the Father. You are my beloved children, and I am completely delighted in you. So come and hear those words as we take. The psalmist said, I have seen the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living, and Jesus came. In the Transfiguration, there are two words from God. There's God the Father, who says, "You are my beloved Son, in whom I'm well pleased." That's a promise. And there's the words from God that says, "Rise up and do not fear." Those are the words for his people this morning. That you are his beloved son, and you are his beloved daughter, and he is well pleased with you. So rise up, and you don't have to be afraid. And those words came from the one whom we can only see, Jesus. And the one that we can only see is the one who does not lie. Go in peace. Amen.